Welcome back. This is part 2. And in part 2 of our IB oral presentation, we are going to be discussing the knowledge question.
Knowledge question.
So just to recap, we're talking about dress codes, and that's our real life situation. The knowledge question is, how is reason affected by sensory perception? Because with dress codes, there is a set of rules that is created after people, maybe one person, maybe a group of people, have decided that that's the appropriate style of dress. And Hannah is going to do some explaining for us. Explaining, sorry.
Okay, so, where is it? Okay. So, essentially, people perceive certain items of clothing to be sexual or disrespectful, primarily on young women. And they develop a reason after seeing certain types of clothing on kids that they decide are not appropriate. So essentially, many people have like their own personal bias based on many factors, so like schema and Katie.
Right. So when people create rules, especially on things that you see, they have to have a reason for doing so, and we want to know how what they see changes when they take it into account, they think about it, mull it over, and decide that it's not okay. So, in this case, it is strongly affected by schema, where you grew up, how you grew up, when you grew up, what gender you are, what age you are currently, what you were like when you were our age, things like that.
Who raised you?
Mm-hmm. So, does age affect it?
So I think age is actually one of the biggest reasons that the rules about dress code is the way it is. Because essentially as generations go on and people get more progressive, and this is also in part because of how much like religion and things like that are diminishing in our society. And so essentially older generations, to them, they're used to, when they were in school, things like that, like things that we wear now would have never been acceptable. And they wouldn't even been like talked about. And even like when you go back even further, like the parents of our parents couldn't even wear skirts that went above like the knee. And they couldn't wear anything besides like half sleeves. And so people who are a lot older generally tend to be more conservative when it comes to the way a person dresses. And so and these are the kinds of people that make these dress code rules. And essentially because of these biases that they develop as they grow up, they tend to be more strict. And that's why the rules are strict.
Yeah, so it feels like people who are older tend to take what they were taught is acceptable and appropriate and apply that to our generation with some slight modifications at best.
It doesn't work though.
Right.
Because we've changed so much. Generations keep changing.
Mm-hmm.
So what they think is acceptable is like extremely conservative or completely unheard of for us, which is just makes it really weird when adults try and create old adults try and create a dress code for young children as well.
So another factor that could influence it is gender.
So gender especially is really big, especially because it's mostly girls that are dress coded. Even though guys, like boys, do have a dress code, they're not allowed to wear like gangster related signs, you can't sag your jeans. It's mostly girls that get dress coded for the things they wear, which does present a problem in society, especially with the sexualization of young girls. There's not a whole stigma surrounding sexualizing young boys, but it does happen, of course. And there's also the gender you are, like determines how you feel about dress code. In our real life situations, we were mostly dress coded by old men, old in their middle-aged men, people in their 50s who are married and have kids of their own, who are looking at these young girls and thinking, her shoulders are showing, that's going to be distracting, and giving us shirts to wear. And it's also, but sometimes the girls or the guys just don't care. So there's actually a supervisor on our campus right now. He doesn't really mind what we wear as long as it's not extremely
like obviously inappropriate,
like gang related, or you're literally wearing no clothes. He doesn't
Actually,
it's not his business to look at a young girl and think I should tell her to change.
And the thing is like when a man says that a girl's shoulders or like collarbones are distracting, especially if it's like even including like the older men, that means that they're distracted by it too.
Yeah, which is definitely a problem. But there's also women who look at a girl and think, maybe that's not appropriate. Like another supervisor on our campus who, any sign of a small violation of a dress code, like a skirt that's just a little bit too short or a shirt that's hanging just a little bit too low, she will dress code you for that. So it is about gender as well. That's another big reason behind dress code. But it isn't the deciding factor. You can look at dress code as a male or a female and make your own conclusions about it. It doesn't really depend on it, but it is influenced by gender.
So another big influence on how these decisions are created and what happens in the mind when reason involves itself with creating a dress code or creating a set of rules is the environment in which the rules are to be applied. Because when examining different dress codes, or at least from what I can remember, I remember that when I was in elementary school, we weren't allowed to wear open-toed shoes.
At all.
Right. Couldn't wear flip-flops, couldn't wear sandals, couldn't wear little flats with little peep toe, couldn't do it. But in middle school and in high school, you can. And part of it might be because it is a big safety issue. And that is an absolute factor as to how these things are created. There's a worry about safety for little kids running around kicking things all day.
Especially on playgrounds with like sand or wood chips.
Mm-hmm, exactly. So. And it becomes a large factor that sticks into your brain and influences what you do. But the biggest influence is the schema of the person creating it. So people will see an outfit and decide that based on their schema, the clothes are inappropriate, and that perspective is shared between the people who create the rules. And rules in general are developed by people with similar schemas because they have to work together to create a set of guidelines that students have to live by, and we don't have that schema, so we see it completely differently. And our sensory perception picks up the exact same thing, but our schema affects it, and it twists the reasoning into something that says that it's not okay, that it's fine, that what they're wearing is perfectly acceptable. But we live in a generation that says crop tops and short shorts are the in style, especially for summer specifically.
And like hotter climates as well, for sure.
Right. We'll touch more on that in a minute, but reason is developed from schema and personal experience, but it's also developed by the environment that's currently surrounding the situation, and that helps to reason out a more acceptable dress code in this case. And because, it doesn't make sense for high school students who barely do any running to have to wear closed-toed shoes every day, which are primarily tennis shoes and flats. Whereas when you're a kid, you're going to kick stuff, you're going to fall, you're just going to be a more active student, and it's going to be more likely that you will hurt yourself if you don't wear the appropriate footwear. Like, athletes can't wear flip-flops when they're running around, so it makes sense that kids should be treated somewhat like athletes.